Thank you very much. Thank you for making this event possible and for hosting me. I really want to take it exactly where James ended it, and that is the question of impact and influence. Because when we think that UNRWA operates based on the UN General Assembly mandate, the immediate conclusion is therefore nothing can and nothing will ever change because we will never have the numbers in the UN General Assembly to change the situation. But the truth is that UNRWA is based, as was described here, on voluntary contributions from Western countries. If those contributions are conditioned on changes in UNRWA, then UNRWA changes. And the General Assembly, in that sense, is not part of the game. So whenever someone tells you, oh, that is a General Assembly issue, they're actually telling you, we don't want to touch it. But the truth is, it's possible to touch it, it's possible to change, and the key is in the Western donor countries who are making voluntary contributions to UNRWA. Now, why are they the key? They are the key, in addition to giving the money, the fact that they support a two-state solution. All of the countries that support UNRWA financially support the attainment of peace by means of a two-state solution. What does it mean? That at the core, they believe that the Arabs in Palestine and the Jews in Palestine both have the right to self-determination, that neither has the exclusive right to live and settle everywhere in the land, and that if peace is ever to be achieved, Israel cannot control all of the land, but neither can Palestine. So this is the thinking that underlines all of the countries that support UNRWA. It is, in order to draw a comparison, it is also the thing that underlies their policy, for example, with respect to settlements. One of the reasons, the major reason that all Western countries, not to varying degrees, pretty much in the same degree, view settlements, for example, as an obstacle to peace, is they think that ultimately peace must come through partition of the land between a Jewish state, Israel, and an Arab state, Palestine. So they do what they can in order to preserve that possibility. But if Western countries were to treat the settlements in the same way that they treat UNRWA and UNRWA's policies, it would look as follows. Israel, go ahead and build as many settlements as you want. We will even contribute $1 billion a year towards that effort. Don't ever tell the settlers that they will need to leave their home. And we trust you that when the day comes to negotiate peace by means of two states for two peoples, you will do so in a real way, in a genuine way that respects the right of the Arabs in Palestine to self-determination. I can assure you that all the Western diplomats with whom I meet regularly find this crazy. But then I tell them, but this is precisely what you're doing with UNRWA. You are basically telling the Palestinian Arabs, go and continue and perpetuate the refugee situation forever. Don't ever tell the descendants of the refugees that they are not going back to the homes of their great-great-great-grandparents that are now in Israel. We will contribute $1 billion a year to that effort, and we trust you that when the day will come to negotiate peace with Israel, you will do so in a genuine manner that supports the idea of the Jewish people and their right to self-determination. Because this is precisely the policy that Western countries are contributing to by contributing to UNRWA. Now, it was mentioned here that Western countries like to think of UNRWA as a humanitarian organization. UNRWA makes sure to present itself as a humanitarian organization. But I very much agree with the comment that I made here. UNRWA is 90% political and at best 10% humanitarian. But yet it is capable of presenting itself as 90% humanitarian and 10% political. And that is the kind of the mask that it is able to put forward to Western countries. Why is it 90% political? Because it is precisely like the child of the glassmaker who goes around throwing stones at people's houses so that demand for windows goes up. That is what Onra does. Onra creates the continued expansion of the market for its product. It perpetuates the status of refugees to the 5th generation by now. It expands it ever more. We heard enough time today about the ways in which UNRWA has expanded definition of who is a refugee. It's almost becoming like the question of who is a Jew. So they keep on adding it from the male line, from the female line, descendants. And this is, all of it, political. And it is 90% of what UNRWA does, because without it, there would not be the need for the provision of services. So that is why it's 90% political and only at best 10%, not even humanitarian, but really more social services. So, and this is the thing that has to be made clear to the Western donor countries. Now, the issue is becoming even more and more relevant as more and more of the countries that support UNRWA are the ones that have voted for recognizing Palestine in the United Nations. And what we have is a situation, and I've met with several diplomats, I told them, your country says that there's a state of Palestine. You voted to admit it as a non-member in the United Nations. And yet your country says that the people who are living in Palestine are refugees from Palestine. How is that possible? So the answer I get from diplomats, and that's their job, they're diplomats, is voting for Palestine as a non-member in the United Nations is not the same as recognizing a state of Palestine. So they admit that this is a fine line, but it is a fine line that they are eager to defend. Why are they eager to defend? Because if we look at the Palestinian strategy for years now, it has been to get the trappings of a state, but without the responsibility of a state. And they've been very careful not to cross the line from getting the trappings of the state to actually assuming the responsibility of a state. Because if they assume the responsibility of a state, they can no longer claim, and it was correctly made here in the comments, they can no longer claim to be refugees. Now, I will say this. I don't deny the Palestinians their right to dream. As far as they're concerned, they can dream that one day Israel will disappear, that the Jews will disappear, that the achievements of Zionism will be rolled back 150 years. Their right to dream, I don't deny. What I do battle is that Western countries that have an official policy of 2 states for 2 peoples and achieving peace by this end collaborate in this dream. And that is the problem. And let me bring a very current example. The Pope is coming to Israel. If you look at the official itinerary put forward by the Vatican, it says the following. The Pope will visit the Kingdom of Jordan, and then he will visit the state of Palestine, and then he will bid farewell from the state of Palestine, and then he will visit the state of Israel. So the Pope and the Vatican, who are about to come to the area, wants to send a message that in their view there is a state of Palestine and they want to recognize it as such. And I believe in their good intentions. They think they're promoting peace. By sending the message basically to Israel, you will not have all of the territory. There will be a state of Palestine and part of it, which is fine. But then the Pope is going to visit the Dahesh refugee camp. which is under Palestinian Authority control. So if he's visiting the state of Palestine, he is clearly in visiting that refugee camp in the view of the Vatican. He is in the state of Palestine under state of Palestine control. And yet he is visiting refugees from Palestine. Where is that Palestine that they are refugees from? Because clearly and hopefully the Pope doesn't think that that is the Palestine that the Palestinians think, which is Israel. So again, I don't deny the Palestinians their dreams and their hopes that one day all of what they view as Palestine will be Arab ruled. But the Pope, the Western countries, cannot collaborate in that, cannot support that if their official policy is two states for two peoples and that this is the means towards achieving peace. So if the Pope wants to send a message of peace, I will take a page. The earlier Pope, Pope John Paul, is said to have been the man without the divisions who have brought down communism. So I would take a moment from that era, a famous phrase from that era, and I would ask the Pope to tell Abu Mazen, tear down this camp. Because if he is truly in support of peace by means of two states for two peoples, and he's sending that message of support for peace by showing that he is visiting the state of Palestine and meeting the president of the state of Palestine, he cannot at the same time and on the same visit be visiting a refugee camp of refugees from the state of Palestine. This idea of enjoying the trappings of a state without the responsibilities of a state has to stop, and Western countries certainly cannot help promote it. So what are some of the things that need to be done? I propose a three-step approach to Western countries that through their legislation and executive decisions will promote it. The first is very simple: transparency. Onra refuses to release the numbers of how many of those under its care are the original refugees and how many are descendants. They keep the number 5 million. And even though James said very clearly that 5 million is not necessarily refugees by international law, in politics, everyone now accepts this number, 5 million. Now imagine if we got the real numbers and we actually knew that they stood at several tens of thousands. I tell you, this is entirely my policy, my responsibility. I'm speaking only for myself. As soon as we would know the real numbers, I would say that the state of Israel, as part of any full and complete peace agreement that ends of conflict, should allow all the refugees to become citizens of Israel, but the real ones, the original ones. All the others are not refugees. So first, get the numbers, transparency. Western countries are giving $1 billion, and UNRWA refuses to do as little as give the real numbers. And that, I think, is achievable. I do not know of a Western country that does not promote transparency, that does not say that it values transparency, and this is taxpayer money, which is a voluntary contribution. Step 2, once we get the real numbers, is to change the registration. Refugees should only be those who truly had to leave their homes. Everyone else, all the descendants, certainly the Jordanian citizens, certainly those living in Syria, and certainly those living in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, should not be registered as such. If UNRWA wants to continue providing them with services, it can provide them services even if their card says descendant or anything else for that matter. As we've learned from all the previous speakers, they provide services for a whole variety of reasons. So change the registration. Imagine the dramatic political impact that will be around the world if we will start to talk about the real numbers and have the real numbers be registered. Again, the Palestinians can continue to say that there are 10 million, 50 million, how many ever refugees. That's their story. But the West will no longer be collaborating with that story. And that is the key issue we need to work on. And finally, the third step should be the gradual transfer of funding so that in the West Bank, in areas under Palestinian Authority control, they get the funding to supply schooling and health care. That is the way to properly build the government. Jordan, we should laud Jordan. We should compliment them for having given citizenship. It is noted citizenship with an asterisk. It is citizenship that does not deny their right of return. So it is a citizenship with an asterisk, but still, they should be given the money that currently goes to Onra. It should go to the government of Jordan for the supply of schools and health care. The same with Syria, the same with Lebanon, and certainly, first and foremost, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and even Gaza, certainly if they go forward with the unity government and they claim to assume responsibility for Gaza, there is absolutely no reason to continue to perpetuate the idea that someone that was born in Ramallah or Gaza, their parents were there, their grandparents there, lived there all their lives, that they are refugees from Palestine. So this is the plan. This is the means of changing. And I think it truly is very important to bring this issue to the kind of the global perspective and to the knowledge of publics in Western countries, because I do at the core assume good intentions. And I do assume that there is a desire on behalf of Western countries to achieve peace by means of two states for two peoples. But if this is truly their objective, they cannot on the one hand promote this idea and on the other promote a policy that undermines it. So I hope that this is of help as kind of steps going forward, and I'm available if there are any questions.
Hi. Thank you. I want to start actually with one question for you, and I don't know then also if James may have a comment about it. But when you talk about, and you noted the Jordanian citizenship with the asterisk, not giving up the right of return, recently Mahmoud Abbas has talked about how the right of return is an individual right that he can't give up. And I understand there was even a rally last week in Gaza where there were children. There was a UN official, I think he was there, and the children gave him letters saying that their right of return of the children are individual rights that can't be negotiated or given up or given away. How do you start to address now this shift in the focus being on the right of return as an individual right, wrapped up, I suppose, also in this definition of refugee, if you're going to try and remove that by changing the definition?
So I think the key issue is, again, is to separate the story that the Palestinians tell themselves from what the Western countries collaborate in. I will say that the stories, the hopes, the dreams of Jews and Arabs in the land, Israelis and Palestinians, are best left to the peoples themselves. So I actually don't argue, don't take issue. I mean, in terms of, as a negotiator, I do, but this is their story. It's one of the reasons I think many Israelis are skeptical of the possibility of achieving peace, because it's still a very powerful story on the Palestinian side. The problem is this. I'm about to write a report on all the meetings I had with the diplomatic community on this issue. And my key takeaway, which in many ways blew me away, was that they don't take the issue seriously. They don't think that the issue of the right of return is a big deal. They don't think that the Palestinians take it seriously, which is why they don't take it seriously. I heard phrases such as, they know they're not going back. They understand that. They've already made the compromises. Abu Mazen said that he's not expecting to go to his home in Safed. And then I always have to tell him, but he's also made it very clear that this is his own personal choice and in no way reflects on the personal choice of each and every other Palestinian. So what I am blown away by is the asymmetry between the West and Israel and how they look at the issue. As far as Israelis are concerned, this is the main obstacle to peace. And it is wrapped in everything. It is wrapped in the denial of the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in the land, of Israel as a Jewish state. It is all part of the core. This is at the core of the conflict. The idea that Zionism is a colonial movement that has taken foreign land, not of people who have returned home. This is the core of the conflict. So Israelis take it very seriously. Israelis, as a result, are skeptical of the ability to achieve true peace as long as the Palestinians continue to dream of this return. But the West thinks it's a minor issue. Again and again and again, they say they know it's not a big deal. For all intents and purposes, they've given it up. And for me, this is the most shocking thing, is that the West does not take it seriously, which is also the reason that it collaborates in this Onra practice, because it doesn't realize that it's 90% political, because the 90% political, it doesn't take seriously.
I can appreciate your argument that the West shouldn't collaborate on the personal narrative or the peoplehood narrative of the Palestinian cause. But then how would you reconcile the idea that this very narrative is the same thing that's radicalizing much of the Palestinian population to the point that they are really rejecting Western values in general? And the longer we go allowing that narrative to take hold in the population, the less likely it is that the leadership will be able to make any decision at all that the population itself will accept without violence. And in that, the West has a huge investment. So when you speak to Western policymakers and negotiators, how do you reconcile those two issues? While not taking it seriously, that's actually intensifying the problem, in the future.
Absolutely. My main claim is, again, against the West collaborating in that. I think at this point the issue is, do not make things worse. And as the medical oath is. So right now, Western policies are actually making the situation worse. And I'm separating that from the Palestinian Arabs themselves, because when it is your issue, it's your issue, and, the Jews and the Arabs, the Palestinians and Israelis are going to struggle there with their hopes, their dreams, their issues. Can they have it all? Will they have to compromise? That's for us to resolve. But I think the question is the West collaborating and making it harder for us to ultimately resolve the issues between us? And right now, they're making it far, far, far worse. So long before we can talk about making it better, I will say let's focus on not making it worse. If we don't make it worse, I will say we have gone a long way, at least towards making it more likely that the two of us, face to face, together, will be able to come up with a solution. But it's certainly not made easier when the numbers get inflated, and that the West collaborates in it, so that the Palestinians know that it's not just them, everyone thinks that they're right, and that creates a very difficult environment for achieving peace.
Very last one, and then quick question.
Thank you. Out of just a lot of confusion and curiosity of my own, prior to 48, during the British Mandate, were there statistics of how many, shall we say, of the Arab population, Christian and Muslim and even Bedouin, lived there? And then what about the people who came in from the region during that period of the British Mandate? Were they caught up during the 48 war? Did they go back to other regions? Are they classified as Palestinians, as the original people? Or do they have to actually own land to be classified as citizens or Palestinians at the time?
So the question of ownership of land is not a prerequisite to registering as a refugee. But there is, and I think this was addressed in the beginning, there is a general sense that during the first few years of the post-conflict years, the first years of Onra, there was a lot of confusion on registration, who registered, and one could argue that the numbers were even already at that time substantially inflated. But I'm even saying, even if we close the page on that period, and whoever registered, and let's not debate that, even though we can go and debate that. But even if we don't debate that, the fact that the numbers have exponentially grown ever since and have made the coming to a resolution basically nearly impossible, that's the thing we need to address. In all other protracted refugee situations, which Onra likes to quote, the graph looks like this. At one point, there is a peak. If the refugees cannot go to their original homes, the UNHCR agency doesn't wait 5 generations. It waits 5 years. And it says, okay, this ain't going to happen. They're not going back to Nepal. They're not going back there. And we're going to start resettling them. We're going to start reintegrating them. And ultimately, the graph comes down. And basically, we go back to the example of the boy throwing the stones. I mean, Onra has been a bureaucratic success if there ever was one. They are constantly expanding, constantly creating their new markets. And the last thing they're trying to do is to truly make the attainment of peace possible. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Einat, Wilf. I want to move on because I know that our next speaker